بنت تومي محمد من مواليد 6 سبتمبر 94 900 وألف برقان، أستاذ مادة الإنجليزية بثانوية مولاي أحمد الطاهري ببريش، خريج المدرسة العليا للأساتذة بالأغواط، وعضو سابق في الاتحاد الوطني للطلبة الجزائريين. يضفي على مقابلاتنا اليوم مداخلة بعنوان مقدمة موجزة عن أول تجربة نووية فرنسية برقان.
The first French nuclear test in history. On February 13th, 1960, the French conducted their first nuclear test, codenamed Tjorba Bleu, or in English, the Blue Desert Rat. The day marked the beginning of a series of 4 atmospheric nuclear tests at the oasis of Raqan, in the Saharan desert of Algeria, with an explosive yield of 70 kilotons. The Blue Desert Rat was relatively large for the country's first nuclear test, around 4 times as powerful as Little Boy, the US bomb dropped on Hiroshima at the end of World War II. The French government had always maintained that its nuclear operations were carried out as safely as possible, yet a confidential military report first obtained by the French newspaper Le Parisien in 2010 indicated that soldiers had been used as guinea pigs and hence were knowingly tested on. The aim was to study the physiological and psychological effects produced on men by nuclear weapons, so as to obtain necessary information to physically and mentally prepare modern warriors. Speaking of which, between 1960 and 1966, 17 bombs were tested and hundreds of soldiers and approximately 60,000 Algerian civilians were deliberately exposed to harmful radiation. As for the compensation programs, the US government granted monetary awards estimated almost $2 billion to 42,000 citizens to ratify a program recognizing those who suffer from illnesses related to nuclear testing or uranium mining. And so did the UK back in 1993 when it granted nearly $30 million as recompensations to the Australian government to cover plaintiffs who claimed death or injury as a result of radiation emitted by the 9 nuclear experiments carried out on Australian soil. On the other hand, in the Algerian Sahara, France's failure to disclose to local residents the extent of contamination in surrounding areas positioned them for decades of ignorance. And as a result, there has been little record keeping by local medical institutions to track the quiet boom of radiation illnesses. For many who lived in Raqan the week before February 13th, in 1960, the only record of their radiation was captured by a necklace when French troops visited populations as the day before the experiment took place. They issued dosimeters on chains to be worn around the neck. A few days later, the troops came back. They collected all the necklaces, wrote down who wore them, and left, keeping the data for their analysis but never returning to let residents know of the invisible dangers that would soon afflict them. Especially that most of this area's inhabitants at the time frequently went back to ground zero to get some of the metallic materials left by the French at the detonation site, keeping in mind they were absolutely clueless of the extraordinary amount of risk they put themselves and the future generations of this region in. In the end, I'd like to quote one of my fellow countrymen, Mr. Ammar Mansouri, who happens to be a researcher at the Nuclear Research Center of Algeria, as he told AFP, "It is time for the French government to be transparent on the nuclear tests in the Algerian Sahara and the dramatic consequences they had on both population and the environment." Mr. Mansouri has also called for all relevant documents to be declassified and brought to light, and for France to take full responsibility for its actions of the near past.